That morning, as I stood in my quiet kitchen rinsing the last breakfast plate, something in the air felt almost too peaceful, like the pause before a storm no one sees coming. My name is Stella Brooks, and I didn't know that within minutes, life inside my home would twist into something I had never imagined. The sunlight warmed the counter. The house felt ordinary, safe, familiar, until the landline rang. I dried my hands quickly, smiling instinctively when I heard the cheerful voice of my younger son, Ivan, the pilot, the boy whose laughter always felt like a warm breeze returning home. But halfway through our small talk, Ivan's voice shifted, lower, tighter, uneasy. "Mom, something strange is happening." I paused. A quiet tremor slipped into my chest. I asked what he meant, expecting maybe a delayed flight or some airport confusion. Instead, he said a sentence that made the kitchen feel suddenly colder. "Mom, my sister-in-law is at the house." I glanced toward the stairs, where the sound of running shower water still echoed lightly. Araceli, my daughter-in-law, had spoken to me only minutes ago. Araceli had smiled in that soft way of hers and gone upstairs to take a shower. I told Ivan she was definitely home, right here, right now. But Ivan didn't respond. He just breathed, slowly, as if gathering courage. Then his voice dropped into a whisper that sliced straight through my ribs. "Mom, that's impossible. I have her passport in my hand. She just boarded my flight to France." For a moment, my mind refused to accept the words. Araceli upstairs in the shower, Araceli boarding a flight to France. Both realities couldn't exist at once. I tried to steady my voice, insisting he must be mistaken, but Ivan continued, serious now, shaken, the humor gone from his tone. He told me he'd returned to the boarding area to retrieve forgotten papers, found a passport on a seat, opened it, and froze. It was Araceli's passport, her name, her photo, her boarding stamp. He had even walked through the first-class cabin to double-check, and there she was, sitting beside a wealthy-looking man, their heads close together like people who share secrets. Something inside me tightened painfully, my knees weakened. But right then, the upstairs water stopped. Footsteps, soft, slow, familiar. Then Araceli's gentle voice floated down the staircase. "Mom, who is it?" A rush of cold fear climbed my spine. I lied quickly, forcing my shaking voice to sound normal. "Just a friend, honey." I moved away, into the living room, hiding the panic crawling across my face. With trembling fingers, I whispered into the phone, telling Ivan I had just heard Araceli come out of the shower. She was here. She had spoken to me moments ago. She had stood in front of me wearing her white blouse, the same one she always wore around the house. Ivan went silent again, a heavy, breath-holding silence. Then, with the firmness he rarely used, he said, "Mom, I'm looking at her right now. She's on this plane. She's right here." The floor beneath me felt unsteady. My breath stumbled. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the phone. The sunlight still streamed through the curtains, but it meant nothing now, because inside my home, inside my life, something was deeply, terribly wrong. And I didn't know yet this was only the first crack in a truth far darker than I ever expected. I stood in the living room with the phone still warm in my trembling hand, trying to steady my breath. Nothing made sense anymore. Ivan had no reason to lie, no reason to confuse the woman in first class with anyone else. He had her passport in his hands. But Araceli, my familiar, gentle Araceli, had spoken to me from upstairs just moments ago. That impossible contradiction pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. As I tried to calm myself, Araceli came down the stairs wearing a fresh light blue dress, her hair still damp, her smile soft and warm. Too warm. She asked if I wanted tomatoes from the market, her voice floating into the air like the most normal thing in the world. I nodded with a stiff smile, pretending everything was fine. She walked out through the gate, the wicker basket swinging in her right hand, the hand she always used, the hand she cooked with, the hand she wrote with, the hand she brushed Matthew's hair with. But something inside me whispered, "What if what you're seeing isn't what you think it is?" The moment the gate closed behind her, a deep uneasiness settled in my stomach. My mind raced back to little things I had ignored, little things that now felt like warnings I had brushed aside. Days when Araceli's sweetness melted into sudden irritability, days when her handwriting seemed strangely different, days when she used her left hand instead of her right, days when she hugged Matthew tightly and others when she wouldn't look at him. I sat down at the dining table, breathing slowly, forcing my thoughts into order, refusing to panic. But then Matthew came home from school, his little backpack bouncing, his laughter filling the room, until he noticed my face. He climbed onto the chair beside me and opened his notebook. "Grandma," he said, his voice small but observant, "my mom wrote my homework yesterday with her right hand and it looked so pretty, but today she wrote with her left hand and the letters looked ugly." He pointed at 2 pages, one neat, one crooked. The difference was painfully clear. I forced a smile. "Your mom was probably tired today, sweetheart." But his innocent gaze looked straight into my soul. "Grandma, some days she hugs me a lot, and other days she doesn't even look at me." His words were soft, but they hit me like thunder. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Collins, our neighbor, stood outside with the plate Araceli had taken to her. She smiled politely, then said something that made my heart twist. "Your daughter-in-law gave me this plate with her left hand yesterday, but I thought she was right-handed. Strange, isn't it?" Her innocent remark felt like a puzzle piece sliding into place. After she left, the silence inside the house felt heavy. I looked at the family photos on the wall, Stephen and Araceli on their wedding day, Matthew as a newborn, Ivan in his pilot uniform. So many memories, and yet now everything felt fractured, like they belonged to a story I never fully understood. The uneasiness pushed deeper. My thoughts circled the same unbearable question. If that was truly Araceli on the airplane, then who was living in my house? I couldn't answer it. Not yet. But something inside me whispered that I was standing at the beginning of a truth I wasn't prepared to face. That night, when Araceli returned from the market carrying her basket, I noticed something so small, yet so sharp, that it felt like a blade sliding quietly under the skin. She was holding the basket with her left hand, and when she smiled at me, there was warmth in her face, but her eyes carried a shadow I had never seen before. The kind of shadow that tells you someone is wearing a smile that doesn't belong to them. That evening, after Araceli returned from the market holding the basket in her left hand, I felt a quiet storm gathering inside me, one that I could no longer silence. Every movement she made felt slightly off, slightly different, as if someone had taken familiar memories and rearranged them by a few millimeters. She placed the basket on the table, humming softly, yet even her humming felt strange, as though the melody belonged to someone else wearing Araceli's face. During dinner, I watched her closely. She smiled at Stephen, asked Matthew about school, and served the fish she cooked with delicate precision. But then, when Matthew accidentally dropped his spoon, the warmth in her eyes vanished, replaced by a cold sharpness that cut through the room. "Araceli, why can't you be more careful?" she snapped. Her voice, usually soft, motherly, calm, came out like an unexpected slap. Stephen frowned, confused. "Araceli, he's a child. It was just an accident." For a moment, her expression froze. Then she forced a smile so quickly, so unnaturally, it felt like watching a mask slide back into place. A heavy quiet settled over the table. Even Matthew ate silently, shoulders small and tense, as if he were trying not to be noticed. In the middle of clearing the plates, a thought struck me with such force that I had to grip the counter to steady myself. If someone pretends to be another, they won't know the small habits, the intimate details, the handwriting, the preferred hand, the temperament, the lullabies. That night when I tucked Matthew into bed, he held my hand a little too tightly. "Grandma," he whispered, "my mom didn't sing to me today, but yesterday she did. She sang the same song you used to sing when I was little." My heart squeezed. Only 2 people in this house knew that lullaby besides me, Stephen and Araceli. But why would she sing it one day and forget the next? I kissed Matthew's forehead and walked into the dim hallway, the house silent except for the faint hum of the kitchen light. Then I did something I had never done before. I took out an old notebook, opened it with trembling hands, and began writing. 3 p.m., left for market. 6 p.m., returned, basket in left hand. Mood, cold, behavior, inconsistent, details, handwriting, switch of hands, tone shifts, voice patterns, sweet one day, harsh the next. Line after line, the page began to filling with everything I had ignored for months. It didn't feel like a notebook anymore. It felt like evidence. But as I wrote, a new memory came back to me, one I hadn't noticed at the time because it seemed so small. A few months earlier, I had seen Araceli writing with her right hand, and the very next day, she wrote with her left. Clumsy strokes, awkward angles, and she had laughed it off as practice. But today, when I compared those differences with Matthew's notebook, something inside me hardened. These weren't mood swings. These weren't bad days. These were 2 different women. The thought terrified me so much that I closed the notebook with trembling fingers. I needed to talk to someone outside the family, someone who wouldn't think I was losing my mind. I picked up the phone. "Carol, are you free? I need to see you. It's urgent." Meeting her at the small coffee shop felt like stepping into a refuge. Her familiar face softened the fear inside me. But when I showed her my notes, every strange detail, every inconsistency, every shift in behavior, her expression turned serious, almost sharp. "Stella, this isn't your imagination. Trust your instincts. Something is very wrong here." Her words didn't comfort me, they confirmed my worst fear. Before I could speak, someone entered the coffee shop, someone who unintentionally pushed my doubts into certainty. It was the vegetable seller, Mrs. Jenkins. She walked straight towards me, smiling warmly, and said, "Mrs. Brooks, your daughter-in-law was so sweet last week, but this morning she didn't even greet me. She walked past like she didn't know me." I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just Matthew. It wasn't just Stephen. Even the neighbors could see it. I thanked her politely, but inside my heartbeat had begun to race. Something was happening behind the walls of my own home, something I hadn't been allowed to see, something I was only now beginning to uncover. That evening, as I walked back home, the sun hung low over the neighborhood, casting long shadows that stretched across the street like warning signs. Because standing at my gate, walking towards the door, was Araceli, but something was off. The way she carried herself, the way her shoulders moved, the way her eyes scanned the yard, careful, cautious, as if she weren't familiar with the place. She saw me and smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone coming home. It was the smile of someone stepping into a life that didn't belong to her. Something inside me whispered, "You are closer to the truth than you think, but the truth might not be ready for you yet." And that night, the house felt different, as if someone else was breathing inside it. That night, sleep refused to visit me. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows stretching, shrinking, twisting, each one whispering a question I was too afraid to answer. I kept hearing Ivan's voice in my ear, kept seeing Matthew's confused little eyes, kept replaying the look of the woman who had stood at my gate pretending to belong here. A quiet certainty had begun forming inside me, a terrifying certainty that felt like stepping barefoot across broken glass. By morning, the fear had grown into something sharper. I needed more than suspicions. I needed proof, something solid enough to confront the truth that trembled at the edges of my thoughts. And so, after breakfast, I watched Araceli carefully. She moved through the kitchen with practiced grace, yet something about her felt like a performance slightly out of rhythm. When she picked up the kitchen towel with her left hand, then switched to her right awkwardly, as if remembering too late which hand she was supposed to use, I felt my breath catch. She glanced at me with a smile, but her eyes didn't smile back. When she said she needed to go to the market again, I nodded calmly, hiding the storm in my chest. I waited until she walked through the gate, her familiar basket swinging at her side. And then, for the first time in my life, I followed my own daughter-in-law. I wrapped my old shawl around my shoulders, keeping distance as I walked behind her through the cobblestone street. The sun was hot, but my body felt cold, cold with fear, cold with doubt, cold with the possibility that the woman before me was not who she appeared to be. At first, Araceli walked toward the direction of the market, just like any other day, but then, without hesitation, without looking back, she took a sudden left turn into an alley behind the old working-class neighborhood. My heart began to drum painfully. Why here? Why this path? Why avoid the market entirely? The alley was narrow, the houses squeezed together like secrets pressed between walls. I kept my distance, hiding behind stacked crates and bicycles. Araceli walked with a pace that didn't match the calm, gentle woman I had lived with for years. She seemed alert, purposeful, familiar with the shadows. Then she stopped. She lifted her hand and knocked, softly, twice, on an old wooden door with peeling paint. It opened only a crack. She slipped inside. I froze. Every instinct inside me screamed to run, to push the door open, to demand the truth. But fear held me still, the fear that whatever truth lived behind that door would shatter my world completely. I stood there trembling, watching a place that didn't belong to us swallow the woman who claimed to be part of my family. Finally, after forcing myself to breathe, I turned and hurried back home, my mind spiraling. When I opened the gate, I stopped breathing. There, in the kitchen, standing calmly at the counter chopping vegetables, was Araceli. Not in the dress she had worn just minutes ago, in a different blouse. Her hair dry, her expression composed. She looked up at me with eyes sharp enough to cut through bone. "Where did you go, Mom? You're just getting home now?" My legs nearly gave out. I had just seen her in that alley, had followed her every step, had watched her disappear behind that wooden door. How could she be here? How could she return so quickly? Was she two places at once? My voice broke as I murmured some excuse, something about taking a walk. Araceli didn't answer. She only stared at me, long enough to make a chill crawl slowly up my spine, as if she were studying me, evaluating me, measuring how much I already knew. That night I sat on my bed with my notebook open, hands shaking as I wrote the impossible truth that had been building for weeks. She leaves and comes back different. Not tired, not changed, completely different. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't calm the storm inside me. Then, just when I felt the weight becoming too heavy, little Matthew burst into my room with swollen eyes. He threw his small arms around me and sobbed into my shoulder. "Grandma, my mom yelled at me because I dropped a pencil, but yesterday she hugged me. I want the mom from yesterday." His words slid straight into my heart like a silent scream. I held him tight, my tears soaking into his soft hair. Because he was right. There wasn't one Araceli living in our home. There were two. One that loved him, and one that didn't even recognize him. Somewhere in the world, a truth was waiting for me, a truth that would unravel everything I thought I knew, a truth that was already closer than I dared to admit. And on the cusp of discovering it, there came a moment, quiet, small, yet powerful, that told me nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, the air inside the house felt heavier, thick, like a secret waiting to be confessed but refusing to speak. I moved through the kitchen quietly, listening to the soft ticking of the clock, trying to understand the strange pattern forming in my home. Every time Araceli left, she returned different. Calm one moment, distant the next, loving one day, cold the next, right-handed one afternoon, left-handed by evening. My doubts had grown into a shape too large to ignore. I needed answers, real answers, not guesses or fears scribbled in a notebook. So when Matthew left for school and Stephen went to work, I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and stepped outside with a purpose that frightened even me. I walked, slowly but steadily, toward the same narrow alley I had followed Araceli to, the same place where she had disappeared behind that peeling wooden door. The street around me was loud with vendors, children playing, women chatting, but inside my mind was a silence so sharp I could hear my own heartbeat. When I reached the alley, the world dimmed. Sunlight barely touched the ground here. The walls leaned close, like they were guarding secrets. I stopped at the corn stand where a middle-aged woman was fanning hot charcoal. Her eyes were sharp but kind. I held up the family photo, the one where Araceli smiled between Stephen and little Matthew, and asked, my voice trembling, "Have you seen this young woman around here?" She studied the picture for a moment, then nodded toward a house with a cracked door and stained walls. "Oh, yes," she said. "She comes and goes from number 14 most days." My breath turned to ice. Number 14, the same door I had seen Araceli disappear into. With shaken legs, I approached it. The world felt too quiet, as if the alley were holding its breath. I knocked twice. For a moment, there was only the soft hum of a distant fan. Then the door creaked open just enough for me to see her. A woman stood there, a woman with Araceli's face. Her eyes widened in terror the moment she saw me. Her lips trembled, her hand gripped a rag, and she looked at me not with recognition, but with guilt. I whispered her name, the name that had lived in my home for years. Araceli? She flinched like the word had struck her. I'm not Araceli, she whispered. My heart thudded painfully. Before I could respond, another voice came from inside the house, soft, steady, certain. Isadora, don't hide. She deserves to know. A young woman stepped into the dim light, thin, hair tied in a bun, intelligence glowing in her eyes. She introduced herself calmly. My name is Lucy Miller, Mrs. Brooks. Please come in. It's time. The room smelled of disinfectant and old walls. A sick old man lay coughing on a cot, and in the corner, the woman with my daughter-in-law's face, the woman who claimed she wasn't her, stood trembling. Lucy placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. This is Isadora, and she is not your daughter-in-law. The world tilted beneath me. Isadora's voice shook as she spoke through tears. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt anyone. I'm not Araceli. I was paid to pretend to be her. Paid? Pretend? To be her? My breath faltered. Paid by who? Paid for what? Paid to replace her inside my own home? Lucy continued, her voice firmer now. Your daughter-in-law found her in the market years ago. They look alike, almost identical. Araceli offered her money, good money, to step into her life whenever she needed to disappear. Isadora didn't want to do it, but her adopted parents are very ill. She needed the money for medicine. Isadora sobbed harder, holding the rag like a lifeline. I didn't know anything. I just did what she asked. Go to the house, take the basket, pretend to cook, pretend to care for the boy. She told me it was harmless. Harmless. That word cracked something inside me, because nothing about this was harmless. Pieces of the past months fell into place. The left hand, the coldness, the strange writing, the forgotten lullabies, the two different personalities, the shifts in tone and behavior. Two women had been living my daughter-in-law's life. One real, one borrowed. And then Lucy said something that made the floor tilt beneath my feet. I once overheard your daughter-in-law talking with a wealthy man, Charles Thompson. They called each other honey. Isadora was waiting outside, unaware of anything. Charles Thompson, a stranger. A man Ivan also described from the airplane. Everything inside me went still. I looked at Isadora, her trembling, frightened innocence, and for the first time I realized she wasn't the enemy. She was another victim. My voice cracked when I finally whispered, Isadora, do you know what your daughter-in-law, my daughter-in-law, has been doing? Isadora shook her head helplessly. I never knew, I swear. Sister-in-law. The words felt wrong the moment I spoke them. And then Lucy placed something in my hands that made my knees nearly buckle. Old papers, hospital documents, birth details. 2 babies, 2 identical births, 2 daughters, one kept, one abandoned. One grew into the woman who married my son. The other stood trembling before me, living a life borrowed from the sister she never knew. A part of me shattered, another part awakened. I straightened slowly, my voice steadier now, stronger than the fear inside me. From today, no one will use you again, Isadora, but you must help me reveal the truth. My family deserves it. My grandson deserves it. Her tear-filled eyes rose to meet mine. She nodded, and at that moment, I knew something irreversible. This wasn't just deception. This wasn't just betrayal. This was the beginning of a truth powerful enough to tear open everything my family had ever believed, and we were only standing at the door of it. When I left that small, cracked-walled house with Isadora's confession and the truth of the twins trembling in my hands, the world outside looked the same, yet nothing inside me was the same anymore. Every breath felt heavier, every sound louder, every memory sharper. I walked home with the weight of revelation pressing down on my shoulders. 2 sisters separated at birth, one raised in comfort, the other in struggle, and now one pretending to be the other to hide a life of deceit. I opened the gate to my house slowly, almost afraid it wouldn't feel like home anymore, because now behind those familiar walls lived a lie wearing my daughter-in-law's face. That night, I could hardly sleep. I kept seeing Matthew's innocent smile, the way he looked at his mom, not knowing which version he would get. Some nights love, other nights coldness. I kept hearing Yvonne's voice on the plane describing Araceli beside the wealthy man, living a life none of us knew about. And I kept remembering Stephen, hard-working, loyal Stephen, who trusted every word she said, never suspecting he was married to a woman who lived 2 different lives. At dawn, when the sky was still half dark, I called Yvonne. "Come home tonight," I said quietly. "Bring her electronic passport. I need it." He didn't ask why. He just said, "Yes, Mom." It was time. For the first time in my life, I prepared a dinner not to feed my family, but to confront it. I set the white tablecloth, lit the candles, cooked Matthew's favorite fish, the one he always asked for, cooked Stephen's chili, because tonight truths would be served with the meal. When Stephen returned home, he looked tired but calm, unaware of the storm waiting at his own table. Matthew ran inside with his drawings, excited as ever. And then Araceli walked in, hair perfect, smile gentle, hands poised, looking like the woman I had once trusted. But now I knew better. Her eyes followed me in a way they never had before, as if she sensed something simmering beneath the surface. We sat at the table. For a moment there was peace, the kind of peace that often comes right before something breaks. Then I nodded. The door opened. Yvonne stepped inside, and behind him, Isadora. A gasp escaped Stephen's lips. He stood abruptly, staring between the 2 identical faces, the wife he loved and the woman who looked exactly like her. Matthew blinked in confusion. "Mom, why are there 2 of you?" His small voice cut the air like a blade. Araceli's entire body stiffened. Her fingers tightened around her fork. Her smile vanished. She whispered, "What is this?" her voice sharper than ever. I rose slowly from my chair. "It's the truth," I said, my voice steady even as my heart trembled. "And tonight we end the lies." Yvonne placed the passport on the table, open, with the France departure stamp still fresh. "You can't be home and boarding this flight at the same time," he said quietly. Stephen stared at her, betrayal rippling across his face like a silent earthquake. Then Lucy stepped forward from the hallway, calm, steady, undeniable. I heard everything. I saw her with Charles Thompson. They called each other honey. She paid Isadora to impersonate her. And for a moment, the room froze. Araceli tried to speak, but words refused to come. Her lips trembled, her eyes darted around, at the evidence, at Isadora, at her son, at her husband. The mask she wore began to crack. Then suddenly she erupted. "Yes," she screamed. "Yes, it's true. I'm tired of this poor life, tired of this house, tired of pretending to be the perfect wife. Charles gives me everything, everything." Her chair scraped violently as she stood. "Stephen, you're nothing," she hissed. "I stayed here out of convenience." The words slashed through Stephen like knives. He staggered back, breath shaking. But the deepest wound came when Matthew whispered in a trembling voice, "Mom, why are you being so mean?" Something inside Araceli hardened. She grabbed her purse and walked out. No goodbye, no remorse, no look back. The door shut behind her with a finality that echoed through every room. Silence consumed us. Then slowly, Matthew burst into tears. "Grandma, I want the mom who hugged me." I gathered him in my arms, feeling his tiny heart break against mine, and as I held him, I felt another presence kneel beside us, Isadora. Her voice soft, her eyes full of regret, pain, and something pure. "I'm not her, but I would never hurt you." For the first time since this nightmare began, Matthew reached for her hand without fear. From that moment onward, something gentle began growing, a healing we didn't expect, a love we didn't plan, a family we didn't know was possible. Days passed, then weeks. Stephen, shattered but determined, filed for divorce. Araceli didn't fight. She didn't ask for custody. She simply vanished into the life she had chosen. And slowly, piece by piece, we rebuilt ours. Isadora came often, then daily, then naturally without hesitation. She cooked warm meals, helped Matthew with homework, soothed him when he missed the mother he once had. She sang him lullabies in the same soft tone I recognized, not because she pretended, but because love came naturally to her. One quiet evening, I watched Stephen slip a trembling hand into hers, not out of need, not out of emptiness, out of healing, out of truth. And months later, under a sky soft with dusk, Stephen knelt beside the rose bush in our yard and said, "Isadora, will you be my wife and Matthew's real mother?" Tears streamed down her cheeks. She looked at me, asking silently for blessing. I nodded, because sometimes life breaks us, only to rebuild us with better pieces. Their wedding was small, filled with real smiles, not borrowed ones. Matthew held her hand, calling her mom with a joy he had never given anyone else. When I watched them together, their laughter, their healing, their new beginning, I finally understood. The truth may hurt, but it sets you free, and sometimes it brings you the family you were always meant to have.